This is part 2 of my conversation with Chaia Heller from the Institute for Social Ecology. If you haven't heard it yet, I recommend starting with part 1, the episode right before this one, to get an idea of the theoretical basis for where we're going in part 2. You're listening to Solarpunk Now, the podcast about politics, science, art, philosophy, and whatever else it'll take to get us out of this mess. Join us, and let's demand a brighter future together. In part 1, we discussed the 5 aspects of social desire and how they could be used as a sort of checklist during an action to see how it aligns with our politics. So I asked Chaia how these aspects could be used not just in the moment, but in our organizing work as we decide what sort of actions to do. Basically, how could we use this theory to develop our practice?
Well, in the book, The Ecology of Everyday Life, the last chapter is called Illustrative Opposition. And in that chapter, I talk about how people who are in social justice organizations or groups can take a single issue that's very pressing and urgent and link it to a far broader revolutionary project and vision. And in that chapter, I also talk about how to take those 5 forms of social desire and make sure that they are being enacted in whatever you're doing in your organization, whether it's you're creating an action or you're writing something together or you're doing CD together or etc. So there's the question about how, this is a really big question, how do we create a good society? How do we create a revolutionary organization that can do that? And for that, I always say start a study group, even with 2 people, and start reading. I think social ecology is a really great place to start. I don't know any other post-Marxist theory that is so general and generalizable and reconstructive. I don't know one that's out there. I think there's a reason that Abdullah Öcalan in prison decided to experiment with democratic confederalism, because there really is not a successor theory or reconstructive vision after Marx. So I think, starting to learn some of the history of revolutionary, to learn revolutionary history is really important. Bookchin wrote a series of volumes called The Third Revolution. You don't have to read all of them. But I think becoming well-versed in political theory and revolutionary philosophy, finding people that you like to work with, and starting, a local or group or organization. And you could confederate your organization with other like-minded, aligned organizations. And an organization I would really recommend people checking out is called Symbiosis. I think it's North American. I think it's the US and Canada. There might be folks from other countries too, I'm not quite sure. But it's really following kind of a social ecology communalist model. And the idea is that people create organizations that share an aligned set of common principles, and they confederate with a larger group of organizations that are in symbiosis. So right now, if I was wanting to become politically involved and really wanting to become a revolutionary, that's what I would do. I would connect with people in the symbiosis organization. I reach out to the Institute for Social Ecology and see if there's a class you'd like to take, or if you want to create a study group. That people at the ISC are always super psyched to help people create study groups. We can send syllabi and reading lists for people who want to create study groups. But really, the thing is, I think Bookchin said that every revolution is an educational project, and there's nothing truer than that. that not only do we need to study, but we also experiment, and we, in our organizing, we learn. Every organization I've been part of has been school for me. Every feminist project that I was part of, I see as like kind of like my finishing school. I was a lesbian, radical lesbian feminist for my 20s and my 30s, so for like about 20 years. And we were doing some pretty wild stuff. And I feel like I was so deeply socialized by the women that I was working with. It was very intergenerational. Um, and we kind of grew our intellectual capacities together and our political understandings of the world. And I was active in the anarchist movement, the green wing of the anarchist movement for decades. And I think, when in doubt, get involved in organizations that move you and that kind of inspire you. And those are like the places I think where we do our best learning.
Perfect. Yeah, we have to make the revolutionary history. So there's one more area of social desire or the socioerotic that I want to kind of address, and that's rationality. And rationality versus rationalization is a distinction you make in the book that I want to make sure people don't skip over that part. Those are different things. So this social desire that you're outlining is a rational desire. It's not a spiritual retreat. So something that we see a lot in our current state of affairs is capitalist rationalization. We see that things are rationalized, but they're not rational. So we want to escape from that rationalization. And that retreat winds up having these kind of like spiritual, like culturally appropriative tones to it, or, retreating into like natural organic products. And that's not a viable alternative. So I'll let you go because it's your thing.
Oh, it was really well articulated. A really great word is disenchantment. That capitalism creates a culture, capitalist rationalization. And what that means is it's when you have particularly industrial and late capitalism, we see the emergence of bureaucracies and kind of capitalist practices that reduce human beings and communities to consumers and demographics. We are statistics. We are now algorithms. It blows my mind. We're not people. And it's disenchanting. It takes the enchanting quality of life out of life, and it's dehumanizing. And so it's very difficult to not feel dehumanized in a world that simply sees us as consumers who once a year go to the polls. And P.S. go to the polls. And I'm an anarchist saying go to the polls. Weigh in once a year, twice a year, and basically, eat, consume, and die. It's a very demoralizing message that most people are receiving, living in a world where we all are basically a number. We are a social security number, we are a credit card number, we are an insurance number, we're a Medicaid number, and we're an algorithm. And so, unfortunately, what happens is people react to capitalist rationalization. And again, rationalization is a reduction of people to things and numbers, to measurable, quantifiable, marketable people, things, and numbers. People react to capitalist rationalization by saying, I know, let's all become really spiritual. And let's create, let's delve into the realm of the irrational, and let's just start. And when I was writing this book, there was a lot in the feminist movement, a lot of focus on goddess worship and Wicca. People around me, my best friends, my partners were witches, where they were in covens. And the solution to capitalist rationalization was to recover meaning and recover a sense of self-valorization and recover a sense of our humanity through spirituality. And I want to put that on a shelf for a second, because I don't believe there's anything wrong with being spiritual or being religious at all. But I don't think we can use spirituality as a way to get past capitalist rationalization. To do that, we have to have an explicitly anti-capitalist movement that has a reconstructive vision and alternative to capitalism, which would be a citizen-driven economy that we, dream up together creatively and humanely and ecologically. So what I was trying to, articulate in the book was, instead of, for me, the response to capitalist rationalization is to create a more rational world. And when Bookchin uses the term rational, he doesn't mean positivist rationality that, again, reduces living things to machines or reduces humans to something mechanistic. It's not reductionist rationality. It's an ecological rationality that that presents a very coherent, dialectical, and I think beautiful theory that is not just based in fantasy, but actually is grounded in real, actual potentialities that we can develop to create a rational new world. And so when I was looking at the socio-erotic, what I was trying to do is say, maybe we could try to rehumanize ourselves and re-enchant ourselves and resist the dehumanization that comes from capitalist rationality by seeing ourselves as erotic beings, and looking at Eros as a connective yearning, a yearning to connect, to be bigger than ourselves, be connected to something greater than ourselves, and to create something that is desirable. Again, not just getting our needs met with bread, but being able to have roses too. And there's this quote that I don't think Emma Goldman ever said, but love it. And it's, if I can't dance to it, it's not my revolution. And the original name of this book, The Ecology of Everyday Life, was The Revolution That Dances. I was really into that title because I'm obsessed with Emma Goldman, and I loved her biography, her autobiography, Living My Life, volumes 1 and 2. I think it's like the best read I ever had my whole life. I just loved that. I don't believe she actually said that, but it is true that she was irritated with all the Marxists who were just in meetings and meetings and meetings and studying and studying and studying. And at a certain point, she was like, fuck it, I'm going out dancing. I'm gonna like go have some fun and have some pleasure and connect with people and be sensual. And she was, people called her to task for that. Well, you're not a real revolutionary if you're out dancing. And she was like, screw that. If we're not dancing, it's not a revolution. It's not the revolution I want to be part of, because we're not prefiguring a world that I want to be part of. I want to be a part of a world where we're dancing. And so for me, the idea was, instead of capitalist rationalization, let's have a revolution that dances. Let's have a movement that is moving and that speaks to our desires for beauty and connection, not just let's each have an individual reverence for a spirit that's very private. And even if it's collective, it's not really creating any tension with political structures that we need to address. But can we all have a secular political eros that we share, that is a social desire to create a better world? And Bookchin wrote about this in his essay, I think, Post-Scarcity Anarchism. He wrote about a libidinal rationality, which I thought was hilarious. Like a libido is a sexual drive that he pulled from Freud. It's really funny. And Herbert Marcuse was a theorist from the Frankfurt School who wrote Eros and Civilization, which I don't know how I didn't really include that in the book. Is the way that I should have paid Marcuse a tribute. It's more because I was much more drawing from Audre Lorde's essay, The Uses of the Erotic, when I was talking about the erotic, than I was from Marcuse. But he's important in this story in that he was somebody who was saying what's missing in Marxism is a real understanding of eros, and what we need in a new critical revolutionary theory is an understanding of how we can stay connected and love each other, and love and create a lovable world that we feel that we can all belong to. That's a really important part of the political project that's usually not attended to.
I really like that. And I like the way you sort of broke down the barrier between desire and sensuality and rationality. You said like this theory is really grounded, but it's also really beautiful. If I can read another one of my favorite quotes, although reason and sensuality are dualistically portrayed as opposites, theoretical engagement is often an intensely sensual event. When I read that, I had like an oh duh moment. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I reading this book? Why am I, doing political scientific communication? It's because I get joy out of this stuff. I get fulfillment. I'm not just doing this to crunch numbers somewhere. It's like it is a desire that I'm expressing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, this, feminism, radical feminism did so many things. And one of the things I love is it really paid credence to the idea of body politics, and that we have to, really hold sacred um, all of our desires to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships and meaningful political experiences that are also beautiful and pleasurable. And like for myself, when I look back at some of my peak experiences of my life, a lot of them were at mass street protests. Like, I remember in 89, we did a shut down Wall Street action, and just decades before Occupy Wall Street. But it was the same similar kind of, but we were trying to we actually did shut down Wall Street for a day.
Wow.
And I was part of a big, huge group of lesbian feminist drummers. We had huge ass drums on like these oil drums, and they were on dollies with wood dollies with wheels. And we are going through these caverns of these skyscrapers in Wall Street, downtown Manhattan, and we're all drumming. I was in a lesbian percussion ensemble, and we're drumming. We just like went to this action thinking we're going to be drumming. And next thing we realized, we were leading the entire march of people behind us. And whenever they wanted the group to go one way or the other, they tell us, go this way. And I remember, like, this is crazy, but imagine I had a mullet, like a really severe, insane mullet.
They're back now. They're in again.
I know. I had a mullet, and we all had our shirts off. And it was the most erotic, sensual experience of my life. Like, it was absolutely just, we all felt so connected to each other and our bodies, and we felt powerful in a really good way. We felt like we're, making history. And, it was just, that was like one of those moments where I'm like, wow, this is a peak experience. And one, you could say this is a religious experience. It kind of was a religious experience, a spiritual experience, but I was like, it was an erotic experience. And I remember thinking about Audre Lorde's essay, Uses of the Erotic is Power. And I'm like, I'm having an Audre Lordean moment. Like, this is happening right now with these drums and thousands of people, all taking to the streets and asserting our power and articulating a vision for what would be a better world. And I'm like, yeah, this is it. And it was pleasurable. It was fun. It was funny. And it was beautiful.
That sounds amazing. Yeah.
I want to say one thing also about spirituality and social ecology, because a lot of people got the impression, I think from the 80s and 90s, it still persists because people still mention it to me. And they say, why isn't there any place for spirituality and social ecology? Why didn't Bookchin write about spirituality? And why don't social ecologists tend to write about it? And what I want to say is that I can, from having known Murray Bookchin really well, I found him to be a deeply spiritual person. He had tremendous faith and hope in the human potential. It was a very human, it was a deep humanism that he had, that believed in people and believed in the revolutionary impulse in people. And he definitely believed in that there was some sort of force, that keeps us all together. And I grew up in a religious, Jewish family, and I'm not an extremely observant Jew, but I'm, somewhat observant. I'm observant Jew. Um, and I also identify as a very spiritual person. I got really involved in Zen Buddhism in my teen years, and I have a very kind of, I'm part of, a movement in Judaism called Jewish Renewal that kind of brings together a lot of elements of Zen Buddhism with, um, Hasidism, which is a part of kind of an offshoot of Judaism, with, Judaism generally. So, and my art, a lot of my art that I sell, is, I'm trying to make kind of like queer, multi-culti, Jewish political art. Um, so I'm somebody who believes and practices a spirituality that for me is completely complementary and aligned with social ecology. And I have never, Bookchin and I used to talk a lot about, because he was raised a very secular Jew, his parents were communists. Um, and he was really interested a lot to ask, like, what was it like to be raised with a religion? What was it like, what was it like to be a religious person? And we had really deeply respectful conversations, going both ways. I never ever felt, that he just devalued my religious beliefs, etc. Um, and I just want people to know that, that just because he was a secular person and he believed in the necessity of a secular philosophy didn't mean he was anti-religion. And the reason I say that is because I still do believe, um, even though I'm a spiritual religious person, I believe we need secular political theories and spaces, because I feel that the political sphere is the sphere of the general, where we generalize out from our subjective needs, wants, interests as much as we can. We can't ever be completely objective, but we can, reach to be more objective, to include other people's perspectives. And that means that, I can go into a popular assembly as a Jew, but I need to transcend my own worldview as a Jew to be able to be part of the broader, human project that we're doing together. So I believe I have to secularize myself. I believe, and I'm happy to secularize myself to be part of the human community and to be part of a wider community. And I don't feel any, conflict around that. And in fact, I believe that, the more the I believe that it cheapens spirituality and religion, I think, to actually make it political. I really, you end up with sort of theocratic structures, and you operationalize, spirituality and religion when you ask it to become a political practice. So I think it degrades spirituality to ask it to do that.
Hmm.
And conversely, I think that it degrades, politics when you ask it to become religious, and to take on a religious outlook. I think that the need, that I think that the secular and the spiritual, need to be separate when we're trying to create a political project together. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a lot of people who find a lot of meaning in spirituality and religion.
Great. Yeah. That's a really great way to put that. Um, so this is something that Bookchin addresses in his work, and you talk about too, using so evolution can provide an objective, like scientific basis for social desire and for these greater degrees of freedom. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what the trends that we see within evolution and ecology are, that sort of mean that social desire flows out from evolution. It's not like a challenge to nature, it's like a continuation, it's part of nature.
Yeah, so what you're pointing to is part of Bookchin's philosophy called dialectical naturalism, where he kind of takes the dualism of society and nature, and he kind of turns it into a dialectical continuum that you could really see more like a spiral. Um, and he looks at the movement um, throughout natural history that goes between the emergence of the first unicellular organic organism through to the gradual emergence of of biological beings that have vertebrae, that have start making cerebral cortexes, who develop increasingly capacities for consciousness. And Bookchin calls the first phase of that evolution as being first nature, and that's the space between the first unicellular organism until the emergence of human nature, which would be Homo sapiens sapien and Neanderthals, modern humans. So that's first nature. And then second nature is the emergence of nature rendered self-conscious, which is humanity. And that history that we are now living out, that is actually the 1% of humanity is unraveling so many millions of years of evolution. And we're watching, it's kind of devastating to watch how quickly how quickly this incredibly long and beautiful evolutionary process is being unraveled. And Bookchin's goal was to create a new society, an ecological society, a directly democratic society that would create a third nature. And that would be humanity rendered self-conscious, but one that can also formalize its conscious idea of freedom, to formalize freedom by institutionalizing freedom, by creating a communalist society, a confederation of directly democratic communities. And very much what people are doing in Rojava is a really amazing attempt to enact that revolutionary vision. What they're doing is fraught and it's flawed, like every human endeavor is, but it's really, really exciting and inspiring and promising in many ways too. So just to go back also, so this trajectory, this natural evolution is, for Bookchin, it's an unfolding of a set of tendencies, and I would use the word tendencies or directionalities or potentialities or trends rather than stages or natural laws. Instead of having a unilineal kind of evolution where here's the beginning and here's the arrow, here's the end, it's an open-ended multilineal process of unfolding that is kind of guided by trends towards increasing levels of consciousness as you move through natural history, complexity, subjectivity, flexibility, and Bookchin would say nascent freedom, that we start to see organisms who are participating in their own evolution become increasingly conscious and increasingly able to be free in that instead of just adapting to their environments, they change and adapt the environment to meet their needs and desires. So that's kind of what he means by freedom. And freedom becomes more and more sort of nuanced and complex and sophisticated as we create culture and we start institutionalizing forms of social relationships. And we, again, create a free nature when we figure out how to formalize our understanding of what a free society could look like. But I will add that Bookchin does not believe there's anything ethical about natural evolution. That second nature, humanity, can attribute ethical value to these trends that we can see, these directionalities move through from first to second nature, but they're not ethical into themselves. And as I mentioned before, with the five fingers of social desire, not one of those trends by themselves is emancipatory or good or anything. It's that when they all come together. So you could pull from those trends. I usually take five principles that I usually use a five-pointed star to show these principles. And usually the principles are non-hierarchy, self-determination, mutualism or mutual aid, consciousness and freedom, and ecology, which would be unity and diversity. And I wish this was visual, then I would show how those principles can then become politicized to create five principles that are political, and they are principles of non-hierarchy, direct democracy, municipalized moral economy, social justice or radical rehumanization, and ecology. Those five principles that when you work with those, you can create the foundation for that good society that would create a free nature.
Perfect. Yeah. So, is there anything else on social desire, social ecology, anything you feel like we missed?
One thing I should say is that I'm teaching a class on feminism and social ecology. I was going to run it this fall, but we're going to run it in February. So I'm really excited about it because I'm actually going to use a lot from the ecology of everyday life, and a lot of the concepts that we've been discussing today. And I'm really excited. I feel like feminism is so central. Feminism and queer theory are so necessary to the revolutionary project. And I'm really excited about teaching a class. The ISCs really needed to have that back in our online programming. So that's really, really excited for that.
Awesome. Are there any other projects you're working on or you know about that you want to plug?
You know, COVID. COVID has changed a lot of things. So, right now I'm personally doing a lot of writing. I'm writing this book, The Philosophy and Politics of Social Ecology. So I feel like right now for me, my activism is a lot about teaching and writing. But I would just invite people to check out the Institute for Social Ecology, check out Symbiosis, and try to stay alive. I'm somebody who part of my work is also I'm increasingly becoming more active around kind of disability rights stuff. I live with chronic illness. I have pretty intense autoimmunity, so I living in a COVID world is different for me than it is for most people because when I got COVID in 2020, I was sick for 7 weeks and I
Oh
had
my gosh.
really severe COVID and long COVID. And it took me a year to recover from neurological damage and damage to my lungs and my heart. So for me, the world is so different. And how I have to sort of reimagine my activism. I'm really psyched that there's Zoom and that there are these remote technologies for people like me because it makes my life so much more possible. So I'm definitely in a process of having to reinvent and reimagine my life in a world where I'm immunocompromised and there's a virus that keeps mutating out there. And most people that I know can take risks that I can't quite take. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the disability rights justice, sort of movement does with COVID, because there's a lot of people who are becoming really, really tragically disabled by COVID, and hopefully they're going to be politicized. And I'm kind of strangely excited to create a movement of folks who try to figure out how to make viable life for people living in a world of COVID, to make a really erotic, so socio-erotic life possible for people living with atypical immune systems.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a moment where we can't go back to normal, whatever that means. Something has to shift, and that's a really exciting frontier. So my last question that I ask everybody, what does utopia look like to you?
What's fascinating to me about utopia is that for me, the bar for what counts as good enough or awesome really changes as we move through the decades. I mean, for me, utopia is, you know, it's a communalist society where people are able to really be political, in the Hannah Arendtian sense of being political animals who have a space in which to enjoy what Arendt calls publicity, meaning becoming a public self that is more known than we're just known in the private sphere, that we actually are known and heard by others, and we make meaning in public with others. So to me, a utopian society is one where there's a robust, juicy, lovely public sphere where the workday is reduced to a minimum, toil is largely eradicated. We rotate tasks that people don't like doing so much. And we just have time to develop our relationships with ourselves. Maybe we develop our creative selves. Maybe we develop our spiritual selves. But we get to really discover what it really means to be free as human beings, enjoying being alive. To me, it's a post-scarcity society that is truly striving to be humane. And to me, humane means having compassion for others, other people, but also other non-human animals and beings, having compassion for the whole planet and trying to live a rational and ethical world that celebrates life in all of its various forms and values people in all of our complex differences. That to me is a really great society. And there's a lot of art.
That sounds like a revolution I could dance in.
Yeah, definitely dancing. Absolutely, a lot of dancing going on.
For those of us on the left who see the need to transition society beyond capitalism, it can be really hard to find hope. It seems like everything's been tried, but nothing succeeded. That sense of the end of history, or that we're being haunted by possible futures that never came to pass. It doesn't help that those who defend the status quo are all too happy to tell us that any alternative to capitalism just isn't realistic, that our ideas aren't grounded in anything scientific or rational. But that's why I find social ecology really inspiring. It's focused on developing a solid theoretical background and actually drawing from science, synthesizing it with the best of theories like Marxism, feminism, and environmentalism. It's countering capitalist liberal rationalization with actual rationality, challenging the status quo on that fundamental philosophical ground rather than ceding it. It's absolutely worth challenging the idea that human nature is inherently greedy and exploitative. There's no reason to swallow the narrative that humans are selfish, and therefore that building socialism or a moral economy or a non-hierarchical society would somehow go against nature. At that point, we've already lost the debate. Social ecology identifies trends like mutual aid, non-hierarchy, freedom, desire, and abundance in nature itself, the same nature that supposedly gives rise to our selfishness, scarcity, and competition. This is fertile ground for further research, and a lot of recent work in this area suggests that science may not be on the side of neoliberal capitalism as much as we might think. That'll have to be a topic for another time, though. For now, If you're interested in learning more about social ecology, I definitely recommend checking out the Institute for Social Ecology. I took one of their classes last year, and it was a blast. The readings were really interesting, the lectures were engaging, and everyone was really excited to get together after class on Discord and just keep the discussion going. I've honestly never been in a class where everyone was that enthusiastic. You can check them out at social-ecology.org, link in the description. Regardless of what theory we find most compelling, it's clear that moving forward into the future, we need to reconsider our relationship to nature. Understanding nature not as something passive and stationary, but as a force of evolution within us, and integrating our idea of a good society with an ecological society is critical. The future of our world, and thus our own future, depends on it. Solarpunk Now is written, hosted, and produced by me, Luca Dowell. The Solarpunk theme song is by Red Keener on SoundCloud. My guest today was Chaia Heller of the Institute for Social Ecology. You can learn more about the Institute at social-ecology.org and check out Chaia's book, The Ecology of Everyday Life, at the Anarchist Library, links in the description. You can follow my show on Twitter at SolarpunkCast or visit solarpunkcast.net for all episodes, including show notes. You can also visit solarpunkcast.net to donate to the show. I do all of this myself and I don't run any ads, so your support is greatly appreciated. That's solarpunkcast.net, link in the description. And remember, the realization of any vision requires action. I strongly encourage you to get involved with local organizations whose goals align with the brighter future you want to see. Analysis is important, but we have to back it up with practice. Keep dreaming big, and as always, keep up the good work.